Hey, welcome back, everyone. So we are continuing our conversation about groups and teams. And just for a quick review, what we covered in the first part of this chapter. So first we identified what is the difference between a group and a team. And what the essential difference is that within groups are a collection of people performing as individuals, right? And so they're all working toward, let's say, organizational goals, whereas a team is working together on a common goal, right? And a team, by working together, is a high-performing group. So collectively, working together towards a common goal is really the key feature that separates teams from groups. And that's the way you maximize performance from them. And then we also reviewed the Tuckman's 5-stage model that groups will go through in becoming a team. And then real quickly, right, and so in the first stage, in the forming stage, people that's when they initially join the team, and everyone's just sort of getting to know each other. In the storming phase stage, the goal here for the leader is just to allow conflict to arise. And that is an opportunity for you to be creative and work out what kinds of goals and strategies you are going to adopt. During the Norman stage, the conflict has subsided. So as a leader, you want to emphasize at this point unity, and everyone sort of knows their roles, right? And you can now begin productively working towards the team's goals. And that's when you arrive at the performance stage. And the performance stage is where everyone is working on a task. They know what tasks that they need to perform. And here, the goal of the leader is just to support everyone in maximizing their performance for each of the tasks that they need to perform. And then the final stage is once the team has come to an end, the joining stage. Here, what you might want to do is just review some of the elements that made the team function well, some of the things that went into making the team perform their job effectively. So in this week, we are going to cover, and I was supposed to have a slide here. Okay, I can add the slide in, which goes over our agenda, but apparently that slide is missing. But anyway, so what we're going to cover today is we are going to cover two main topics, and that is what do we specifically now need to do to build an effective team and how to handle conflict. So I'd like to begin by actually just playing this video, which covers a study that Google did when they ran an experiment and test to try and figure out how to build the perfect team. So let me go ahead and play that. Hopefully you all will hear the audio.
One of the biggest,
and hopefully there is no ads. Here we go.
Questions is how to build the perfect team. And in fact, about 4 years ago, Google invited me to come spend some time with them because they were in the middle of a big project called Project Aristotle, a huge data study to try and figure out how to build the perfect team at Google. Initially, their hypothesis was that the best teams are teams where you put people together who like each other, right? Maybe you need a good mix of extroverts and introverts. Maybe you need people who are friends away from the conference room. And so they looked at the data and they did experiments, and they found that who was on a team actually didn't matter at all. They couldn't find any correlations between team membership and team success. So then they started looking at how a team interacts. And this is where suddenly everything became clear. Because what they found is that the people who are on a team matter much, much less than how those people interact. That you could have enemies on a team together, or you could have strangers or friends or people who don't get along, or all introverts or all extroverts. And as long as they treat each other a certain way, as long as there's a certain culture, then that team will gel. So as they started looking at these behaviors, what they found was that there were two in particular that mattered more than anything else. The first was called equality in conversational turn-taking. During a meeting or a set of meetings, if everyone speaks at roughly the same amount, then that team is much more likely to succeed. But just speaking isn't actually enough. The second characteristic that teams need in order to do well is called ostentatious listening. That basically, in addition to encouraging you to talk more, I, as a team leader or team member, have to show you that I'm listening by doing things like repeating what you just told me or closing my computer so I can make eye contact with you. If you have these two characteristics, conversational turn-taking and ostentatious listening, it creates what psychologists refer to as psychological safety. And psychological safety is shown as the single greatest correlate with a group's success. When a group feels like they are psychologically safe with each other, you unlock their best ideas, their ability to work together, their innovative capacities. Google's fundamental belief, as is true for many other companies, is that it's only when a team comes together that you actually get the best ideas out of each person and the best work at getting things done.
Okay, so just to recap, what Google found when they ran the study trying to figure out what is it that makes a team perform, what makes a team generate the highest degree of performance. And what they found was that what matters most is not who is on the team, but how they interact. And the two most important features about how people interact that predicted how well the team did was that everyone was able to speak in equal amounts, and that there was a process of active listening of the person who was speaking. And active listening it's not a term that Google used, but this is a term that a way of interacting with people that is studied often within group dynamics. And so active listening is just the idea that you are taking what that person is saying seriously, you're listening, and you can demonstrate that you are listening by actually reflecting back to them what it was that they said. And so that's just a process of active listening. And just these two features alone had a very big impact on the performance that Google teams were able to generate. And so if you're going to take anything away from this lecture, it's that just doing that alone is a very powerful way of improving how well your team does, right? Just making sure everyone gets an equal say. So enable everyone to contribute. And you know, this was a process where they, you know, when the team got together for meetings, that was when, you know, they had the opportunity to speak up. So what it mattered. And, you know, you took those ideas and what they said seriously, and you demonstrated that seriousness to them through this process of active listening. And the scientific research actually supports this, that this is something that is effective. But the scientific literature actually highlights a number of elements that generates high performing teams. And so listed here are 7 of them. So these are some of the things, the most important things you really need to consider when you want to create a team that maximizes performance. And so the first one is collaboration, right? You want to be able to create an environment where people work together. one way to do that is through the compensation system, right? So through rewards. And you would reward, the way you would do this is you would actually reward group behavior rather than individual behavior, right? So rewards will be determined by how the group as a whole does rather than individual members. The other is trust, right? And this gets at the heart, I think, of what Google found out in their study, which is you want to create an environment of psychological safety so that people feel free to share their ideas. They feel free to maybe disagree, right? And that whenever they do any kind of sharing, that they're going to be supported for doing it, right? That they're not going to be mocked, they're not going to be shunned, they're not going to be dismissed or belittled or anything like that. So it creates an environment where it is safe psychologically for people to contribute. So that's a very key feature. And it's something very, you don't need to be very skilled to do this, just to allow people to speak. And then when they do, treating them, the right way. And we'll get into, at the end of this lecture, some of the specific things you can do to build up that psychological safety. The other thing is you want performance goals, right? So people need feedback on how well they're doing. And we covered this a number of weeks ago when we talked about goals. And so what you want is you want SMART goals. So these are goals that are specific and that are measurable, so people know exactly what it is that they need to do. Motivation, you want to create an environment where people are accountable, not to some manager, right? Not to the bureaucracy, not to the department, but to each member of the team. And that kind of motivation is a way of building an effective team. And then composition. And so here, the kind of composition, now Google mentioned that the composition didn't have much of effect, but there are studies which show that the composition of members within a group does matter. And some of the things, the kind of composition that does lead to improving the effectiveness of teams is having diversity, right? And so it could be diversity along a lot of different dimensions. It could be diversity in skills, diversity in maybe functional background, right? So salespeople and engineers, finance people, diversity in experience, diversity in age. You get the point. I mean, so whenever it is that you increase diversity, then there's a greater chance of people injecting novelty, which leads to a process of creativity and innovation. And all of that is a way of effectively solving problems. But diversity needs to be managed for, and because diversity means that there's going to be lots of people are going to have lots of different kinds of ideas, and so there's going to be conflict, right? Conflict is just the intersection of two opposing ideas. So that needs to be managed for. And so another makeup that's important among the members that are part of this team is emotional stability. And we talked about this in the section on individual differences, right? And so if you have people whose personality type leans on the more neurotic side, right? This is the kind of person then that will sabotage the effectiveness of your team. You need members who are okay with dealing with uncertainty, dealing effectively with others, dealing with conflict that arises when people have opposing ideas. And all of this is a trait of people who have emotional stability. And then these last ones are just roles and norms. And so people need to know what they need to do And people need to be in an environment that holds them accountable and supports what they do. So those are the ways that evidence shows are effective at building teams that maximize performance. Okay, so conflict. So conflict here, defined as the process in which one party perceives that its interests are being opposed or negatively affected by another party, right? And so people are going to have opposing ideas, right? Expressing those opposing ideas will result in conflict. Now, conflict may automatically have in your mind a negative connotation, but there could be good conflict and there could be bad conflict. And so good conflict is what's known as functional conflict. It's functional because it actually improves performance. And it'll improve performance because conflict is just means that there are lots of opposing ideas. And so, you know, if there's a diversity of ideas that are being presented, that's the process that drives creativity. That's the process that drives innovation, which is what you need to rely on in order to effectively solve problems and progress and to perform at a high level. Dysfunctional conflict, right, is the kind of conflict that, you know, elevates, let's say, into fights, right, or derails progress, or derails people's ability to collaborate. You know, if it undermines unity, this is now conflict that's gone to the point of being dysfunctional. And so, given that you have conflict that's both functional, that's beneficial, and dysfunctional, right, that's not beneficial, what research has found is that ideally you want some conflict. And so if you have too little conflict, that's not good for performance. And if you have too much conflict, that's also not good for performance. So to maximize performance, you want to have some degree of conflict. If you have too little conflict, right, of course, that may mean that your organization or your team is stagnating, right? You're not considering new ideas if there's very low levels of conflict. If you're not considering new ideas, then you're probably not innovating, right? Then maybe you are not considering enough alternatives to what you're doing and seeing and considering whether there might be ways to improve upon what it is that you're doing. And so you want some degree of conflict because that means that's a signal, that's a sign that you were really sort of testing whether what you're doing is the best way to do things, right? And it's a sign that you are considering alternatives to see if there might be better paths to follow. And of course, if there's too much, right, that's derailing relationships, that's derailing progress, right? And so you want to avoid that as well. So there's a sweet spot where you want some conflict, not too little, but not too much. So given that we know that conflict is actually a good thing, then you want to manage for that. You want to actually stimulate some constructive conflict. And so on this slide, there's a few ideas here in order to generate that conflict, and we'll go over a couple of them. Very simply, one way to generate conflict is to play devil's advocate, right? And so any idea that someone comes up with that everyone agrees with, you want to assign, you know, in some brainstorming session, you want to assign someone the role of taking the alternative position, the opposite position, right? They may not agree with that position, right? It may be assumed that that's the wrong position, but you take it anyways because the work that's required in actually defending that position may uncover ideas that you haven't really considered, right? Because you didn't really put the effort into considering alternatives. And it might sort of prompt you to think of new ways of doing things, and it may sort of improve the ideas that you come up with. So including devil's advocacy as part of your meetings, right, as part of your brainstorming sessions, is one way of injecting a healthy amount of conflict. The dialectic method is just more of a sophisticated sort of form of devil's advocacy, where you would just have people take opposing sides of some kind of issue, right? You would take opposite sort of positions on some idea, and then you would have a debate about it, right? And so, it's sort of a more vigorous form of devil's advocacy. But again, these are just very simple ways that you can introduce to your group's dynamic to improve the decision-making processes with your group. And, and there's, now that we know that we want some conflict, but not too much, right? That's sort of your cue as to when these ideas would be appropriate, right? And so just as an example, so as a student, if you're part of a student group, you have to do, let's say, some kind of student project where you have to research a topic and write a paper on it. And in your first meeting, everyone comes to the table, someone suggests an idea of a topic, everyone loves the topic, and we say, okay, let's go for it. And there was very little debate. There was no conflict. There was no alternatives presented. That's the time where you might want to, formally inject a little conflict into the process to see if there are some maybe alternative ideas that you're not considering that might be better, right? But if you spend the entire meeting arguing over ideas and making very little progress, right, you've maybe tipped the scale. You're on that other end of the conflict spectrum where it's too much and it's undermining performance, right? And so that's the point where you want to dial back the conflict. And so playing devil's advocate, obviously at that point wouldn't be appropriate. So conflict's a good thing. It's something that you want to inject in your group process. So how do you effectively deal and handle conflict? Whether it's deliberately introduced or more likely just something that you encounter during the regular process of getting together with your group, with your team. So here are ways in which you can improve the way that you handle conflict. And so there's a couple here that I think highlight what Google found to be so important. And that is equality, right? So you want to treat other status and ideas as equal to yours. You may go into your meetings with your team with this sort of air of superiority, right? You may think that you have the superior ideas, and it may be because maybe you have more experience, you're more knowledgeable, whatever the reason might be. Lots of people are going to have this perception that perhaps their ideas are superior. That kind of attitude will undermine your group dynamics, right? And so you want to check that when you are engaged in conflict with others. And the approach that you want to do is that you want to take is an approach where you treat someone as equal. You go in there on the assumption that they have something to offer that's just as good as your ideas. And if you're not seeing it, it's because it hasn't been clearly expressed at this point, right? So you have to go in there with the assumption that if you're not seeing the quality of ideas, it's because you're probably missing something, right? So you want to go in with that attitude. You want to take what they're saying seriously, right? And that's the basic idea. Empathy, so trying to experience the other person's feelings and point of view. And here, this is all about creating that environment of safety, right? Of psychological safety. where they know it's okay to suggest ideas, and that those ideas that they suggest are going to be taken seriously. And active listening, there's a process called motivational interviewing that you can adopt. And all that means is just you want to demonstrate to them that they are equals and that you are listening by reflecting back to them the ideas that they're suggesting. And if you're not getting it, and if in your mind your immediate reaction is this is an idiotic idea, you sort of want to check that attitude by probing with them what it is that you're missing because you're not seeing the idea in the way that they are. And so that's sort of like the basic idea. And again, supportiveness, you want to make clear that you want to find a resolution that will benefit them both, and you want to be positive, right? This is an ongoing theme. You always want to sort of generate a positive experience in your interactions. This positive approach will serve you well in all of your efforts. And so those are, basic behaviors that you can adopt so that you can you're better able to handle conflict. So here are 5 conflict handling styles. Some people will lean heavily within one of these, right? And so there may be a conflict style that you adopt more often. Depending on the situation, though, some of these styles will be more appropriate. So the 5 styles are avoiding, and here you just ignore whatever the conflict is. And this might be appropriate. This might be appropriate if the thing that you are having a conflict about is just not important, right? It's just not important to you, or it's just not an important issue, right? So it might be appropriate to avoid it altogether. Obliging is just going ahead with what the other person wants to do. Now, this may be appropriate if your goal here is to generate sort of a spirit of collaboration, right? If the team is requiring an injection of more sort of unity, right, it may be appropriate at this point to be more obliging. There also may be something that you can get in return, so you want to be obliging at that point as well. So that's obliging. Dominating is you have everyone do it your way, right? And you use your authority to force them to accept your position. And this might be appropriate if it's necessary for the team to adopt that position, even though it's unpopular. And an example of this might be a situation where there's an approach to doing some kind of job that's saving everyone a lot of time, but that approach might be dangerous, right? There may be some degree of risk that, could cause injury or something like that. And so that's something that you would use the dominating conflicts handling style, and it would be appropriate to force the group to accept your position. Compromising is when you split the difference, right? And so here, nobody gets what they want. Everyone has to give up something. And this would be appropriate if you were up against someone who has an equal degree of power as you, and you just have opposing viewpoints, right? If you're headed in opposite directions, if one person's a Republican, the other person's a Democrat, you're not going to see eye to eye. So to make any kind of progress, you need to compromise. Each of you needs to give up something to arrive at a place that you could agree upon. And then integrating is an approach where it's more collaborative. You cooperate to generate some kind of win-win solution. This would be appropriate if the issue that you were dealing with is complex. And so then you'll work through the issue together in a cooperative fashion to identify what the problems are, and then maybe in a collaborative way, come up with a solution to that problem. And that ends our lecture on groups and teams. So have a great weekend, and I will see everyone next week.